Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Matthew Page, who's a senior researcher with Monash University, and today he'll be talking about the Prisma standard update, and I'll let him to introduce himself a little bit further.
Great, thanks so much, Carol. So yeah, I'm a senior research fellow in the School of Public Health and Preventive Medicine at Monash University, and I've been working in the last few years on updating the Prisma reporting guideline for systematic reviews. I also have roles within Cochrane, being a co-convener of the Cochrane Bias Methods Group. And so I've done quite a few projects on tools to assess risk of bias. So that's kind of another area of interest that I have. So it's great to see so many people joining this webinar today. I hope now that I know that there's going to be an evaluation at the end, I'll have to do a really good job. So that's news to me, Carol. But so we'll see how we go at 7 a.m. in the morning. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming along. It's really nice to be able to share with you some information about the Prisma 2020 statement, which we released about just under a month ago. And thanks again to the organisers of this Method Speaker Series. It's a really great initiative. I just need to declare some funding that was used to help develop the Prisma statement. So mainly funding for me via 2 Australian early career fellowships over the last few years. I also need to declare that I have no actual or potential conflicts of interest in relation to this presentation. I also want to acknowledge all of the co-authors of the Prisma 2020 statement who have worked since, we've pretty much been working on this largely since 2018. Particular thanks go to Joe McKenzie and David Noah, who are co-leads of this initiative. But everyone did play a big role in writing certain sections of the guideline, and it was really impressive to see everyone's commitment to get this work completed, especially during last year, while everyone had all these other commitments during the pandemic, either caregiving or other research or clinical practice guideline contributions. So it was really nice to have everyone keen to see this work completed. I also want to acknowledge many other individuals who made a contribution to the overall guideline, either by completing the survey early on in the process to give their views on the original Prisma statement, or to provide some feedback on a pilot version of the guideline, or to provide helpful comments on the preprints of the guideline that we released in September last year. So thanks to everyone who made a really valuable contribution. Why do we need complete and proper reporting of systematic reviews? Well, it's important that users of systematic reviews really need to know what the authors did and what they found. And so clear reporting of systematic reviews enables various things. It enables others to attempt to replicate the methods and see if they obtain the same result. It allows users of the review to be able to assess the trustworthiness of the review findings. And it also allows users to determine how applicable the findings of the review are to practice, and whether they're actually going to be able to use the findings from that review and apply it to the setting that they're currently working in. So where does Prisma come into all of this? And what does Prisma even stand for? So this tweet a couple of years ago from Andrew Booth, I really love, and I think it needs a lot more attention on Twitter. It was a very clever summary of what Prisma often means to many people, but that's actually not the true acronym. We could have changed it to that, but the true acronym is actually, it stands for Preferred Reporting Items for Systematic Reviews and Meta-Analyses. And so it was published back in 2009, and this is a photo of the original group who I think met in 2005, maybe. What they did was they developed a minimum set of 27 items for reporting across all stages of a systematic review report. And since being published in 2009, it's gone on to be cited more than 60,000 times, according to Scopus, and has been used by many systematic reviewers who are seeking help in how to write their review, but also be used by a lot of methodologists who've been wanting to have some sort of rubric to assess the reporting quality of published reviews. It's also been endorsed by many journals, and since it was released, there's been 16 extensions to Prisma that have either been published or that are underway, which focus on different aspects of a systematic review, either the protocol or abstract, or different analysis methods, such as for network meta-analysis or for meta-analysis of individual participant data. Now, back in the end of 2017, I was discussing with David Moore, who spearheaded the original Prisma. We'd just come off completing a paper evaluating the reporting quality of systematic reviews. It was published in PLOS Medicine in 2016 that identified that many items were still poorly reported despite being recommended for reporting for several years. There are also several changes that have occurred in the last 10 years in the methods that are available for systematic reviews, such as the growing availability of text mining and other machine learning tools to help expedite the review process. Also, the development of alternative statistical synthesis methods beyond just meta-analysis that authors could consider using, and changes in risk of bias tools and other tools for assessing the quality of evidence included in reviews. There was also some changes in terminology that had evolved throughout the years, and also changes in introducing new avenues for disseminating systematic review reports and their materials. So with the open science movement and different platforms making it possible for people to start sharing a lot more information in their review, we thought that it would be timely to help draw people's attention to that so that they could better disseminate their work and adhere to the guidance in Prisma. And we also felt like it was a good idea to have a look at the current layout and the wording of items and see if we could maybe rearrange and rephrase them to enhance their clarity. So Prisma 2020 development occurred by several stages, which I'll outline briefly. So we had started off with a literature review, then conducted a survey, then held the consensus meeting, and then a very long period of drafting of the manuscript and the guidance. Excuse me. So in terms of the literature review, which was published in Journal of Clinical Epidemiology in 2020, what we decided to do was, we'd already previously done an evaluation of the reporting quality of reviews. And in addition to that, we decided it would be useful to see what other guidelines for reporting of systematic reviews currently recommend. And so we identified, we did more of a selective review of all Prisma extensions, any other major reporting guidelines for systematic reviews in various fields that have been uploaded to the Equator network. We looked at some key conduct manuals for systematic reviews, such as the Cochrane Handbook and the ARC Methods Guide, or AHQ Methods Guide. We also looked at some major tools for assessing quality and risk of bias, and then some tailored checklists that have been developed to evaluate reporting quality of systematic reviews. And across all these sources, we managed to extract and collate 221 unique reporting items. And when we mapped these items against the Prisma statement, or as in the 2009 Prisma statement, we noted that there were pretty much all existing items in the Prisma statement could have been elaborated or expanded in some way with additional guidance that we had identified from these additional items. In certain sections where there was most room to potentially add new guidance were with the items on the information sources and databases, data items for extraction, and the methods and results for synthesizing results. So certain additional items beyond just meta-analysis were things we could have considered for inclusion. Then we used this populated list of items to then go and contact individuals in an online survey in 2018 to hear their views on both the current and some potential new Prisma items. So we invited 220 individuals, including members of the original Prisma statement and the Prisma P, the protocol statement, leads or corresponding authors of all the Prisma extensions, editors-in-chief and associate editors for various, or for two systematic review journals, so BMC systematic reviews and research synthesis methodology, conveners of Cochrane methods groups and the scientific committee, and then some others nominated by the steering group who we felt would be valuable to contact and get their thoughts. And of the 220 people invited, we got responses from 110 people from 22 countries. And essentially the survey was asking them what they thought about the existing items. And we found that more than 2/3 of the respondents thought that it was fine to keep 6 of the items as they were, whereas more than 2/3 felt that it would be good to modify 15 of the existing items. Mainly, we presented a proposal for how we could modify the item to get their thoughts on that, but they were also able to propose their thoughts as well. And then we also gave, there was also more than 2/3 recommending we include some potential new items. What was unexpected or unanticipated to me was that a lot of people were very passionate about what belongs in the Prisma statement. And so we had a total of 150 pages of free text comments on each of the items that we managed to comb through and do, I guess I would probably consider a primitive qualitative analysis of those set of comments. But many comments were useful in helping us think about a different way of structuring or providing different content for particular items, which we then brought to a consensus meeting held in 2018 in Edinburgh, just prior to the Cochrane colloquium that was held there that year. And we had attended some 21 individuals from 7 countries. And at the meeting, what we did was we presented data from the literature review and the survey, and then discussed as a full group some proposed modifications to the existing items, what we thought about possible addition of new items, and then some dissemination and implementation plans. And so there was no formal voting per se at that meeting. It was more a time that spread over those 2 days to really generate more ideas and thoughts about how we could better improve upon the existing statement, and really debating and discussing the wording of these items. This is all of us at the meeting back then. It's kind of confronting sometimes seeing a photo like this now. I know it's still a bit of given the way the world is in the moment, I'm not very distant. This was back in the time, and that was okay. And then, so beyond that period, there was over about a year or so, there was quite a long period of drafting the statement. I remember finishing the consensus meeting, naively saying to the group that I anticipated we would have an updated guideline within 6 months from that meeting. That clearly didn't happen, but it was definitely worthwhile having the time to think in quite a lot of time and have many drafts that we could get feedback from all the collaborators. So in total, we had about 6 rounds of feedback between 2019 and 2020, where all authors were able to comment on all sections of the guideline. Then in April of last year, we sent around a preliminary version of the checklist to 15 authors who had contacted us throughout the year or the years leading up to that period, who had expressed an interest in piloting or giving feedback on the draft version, and incorporated that feedback in the statement. And then finally, we uploaded preprints of Prisma to Meta Archive in September of 2020. And across the drafts of Prisma, it was very helpful. Joe McKenzie, who co-led the statement, she managed to go through all the drafts of the statement and noted that just within the author team itself, there were over 6,000 suggested changes from our co-authors, with over 2,000 suggested insertions, 2,000 deletions, and 1,500 comments that we had to comb through in order to perfect the guideline that we were developed. In that process, this was essentially what my life looked like for a large part of that period, with many comments even just on page 1 of the guideline. But I have noticed that a fancy feature of Word is that if you actually save a Word document with all these comments as a PDF, creates this beautiful colored rainbow of comments, most of which you can't actually see. It collapses them, so hopefully you can just ignore them. But either way, I think it's a nice image to sort of show how far we've come. And then in March, so March 29, we had the Prisma 2020 papers were published. So we had the statement paper co-published in the BMJ, PLOS Medicine, Journal of Clinical Epidemiology, Systematic Reviews, and the International Journal of Surgery, who had played a role in publishing the original version of the Prisma statement, as well as a explanation and elaboration document. We sent out a tweet on that day that the papers were out, and it was good to see quite a lot of enthusiasm, lots of shares and retweets of that Twitter thread. But my most favorite response to that Twitter thread was this one here, pointing out that this could be perceived as academic Christmas. There's quite a lot of people who were expressed their excitement about getting a chance to look at the new guidance in Prisma. So it's been really nice to have that support, and so far. Okay, so an overview of what Prisma 2020 includes. I just should say just the links to the paper. So the BMJ paper links for the statement paper and the explanation and elaboration paper are there. We also produced a development paper which is published in Journal of Clinical Epidemiology, which provides quite a lot of detail, the results, the methods and results of our development process. And so we outline the findings of the survey, so responses to each question on the survey with summaries of the qualitative, the free text comments. And then we also include some tables outlining what was presented at the meeting and the decisions that were made, and then a quite extensive table outlining the changes to the from the original statement. So a lot of that is in quite a lengthy appendix online, but it's really for those people who are curious to know how things have moved beyond the original statement. It was also exciting to see that in its first month, we've had these papers were accessed across the different journals more than 65,000 times. So really humbling to see a lot of people interested in seeing what Prisma 2020 has to say. So just a broad overview of Prisma 2020. It includes 7 sections covering the sort of main standard sections that you would expect to see in a systematic review, and retains 27 items, but we have broken down some of these items into sub-items where we felt it would be clearer to help make help break down some items that were filled with multiple components. We thought breaking them down might be easier to help interpret those. Adopting a similar structure to Prisma P, which also has some sub-items as well. And some key changes in Prisma 2020. Essentially, all the checklist items have undergone some revision, mainly use of more inclusive wording regarding different methods. So when the original Prisma statement was written, it was targeted primarily for systematic reviews of health interventions. And if some might argue, even mainly for systematic reviews of randomized trials of health interventions. We have still maintained that sort of primary vision that it should be applicable mainly to reviews of intervention studies, be they randomized or non-randomized. But we also felt that it would be useful to use some wording that could be easily applied to reviews, not only of health interventions, but other types of, say, health, educational and social interventions, but for reviews with other types of objectives, such as looking at prognosis or etiology for a health question. And so we've kind of removed certain items that are very strictly wedded to that standard review of interventions, so that we hopefully make it more applicable. We also reordered some of the items in a way that we think has achieved a better flow in which people actually present the information. And as I said, we split some of the current long items into sub-items to help clarify their content. We have introduced a small number of new items, some of which one could argue are not necessarily new items per se, because they were actually already embedded within the original explanation and elaboration document of Prisma. It's just that they weren't front and center within the checklist itself. So if those people who were using the original explanation and elaboration documents when writing their review would probably have to change far less, we anticipate, than if they were using just the checklist alone. We have revised the explanation and elaboration documents substantially, including its structure, and I'll show in a couple of slides how we've changed the structure of the E&E document, and also sort many examples. So we include a single example per item in the E&E paper, but then also have a free online appendix that has up to four examples per item. And we also changed the flow diagram templates, and I'll show you the flow diagram a bit later. So some key changes to highlight. So compared to the original Prisma statement, we include a more explicit request or recommendation for authors to report the full search strategies for all databases and registers and websites that they consult. So the original statement really just sort of said only provide one. I think at the time that was maybe disseminated at a time when maybe there was limited space to upload everything in an appendix on a journal website or in a repository. But now I think it would be worthwhile to get people to upload all of their search strategies for any one of those who are keen to replicate them or to evaluate whether there's any possible errors in those search strategies. So making it fully transparent. We also include a more explicit request to report how outcomes were defined, which was lacking in the original statement, and also how authors came about deciding which result to select that was compatible within each outcome. We have embedded throughout the statements guidance on asking people to declare whether they used any automation tools to help facilitate study selection or data collection or risk of bias assessment, and some advice on what they should report if they use such methods. We also recommend people present characteristics and risk of bias among studies contributing to each synthesis, so more on a per synthesis basis rather than just overall. And then some protocol amendments, if there were any, to declare them. So that is now front and center in the checklist itself. And conflicts of interest of review authors, which itself was not in the checklist, but it was recommended in in the item on funding for the explanation and operation document. So we thought, again, making it just crystal clear that we expect people to report both funding and conflicts of interest. We thought that would be worthwhile. We also have some new items and sub-items, expanding the guidance on what to report when it comes to synthesizing your results. So an explicit request to report any criteria or processes used to group studies based on different intervention characteristics or outcome characteristics. Any methods used to prepare the data for synthesis, such as maybe any data conversions or imputation of missing data. Any tabulation and visual display methods that authors might have used. I think the vast majority of authors tend to use just forest plots to present their work if they've done a meta-analysis. But again, we're anticipating that not everyone will use a meta-analysis, and they may end up using other synthesis methods for which there are other plots and different ways of tabulating their findings that they might have used, which would be good to make clear to readers. And finally, yes, as I say, guidance on meta-analysis and some brief information on other statistical synthesis methods to complement the guidance in the SWIM guideline that came out last year. We also included new items on the methods and results of your assessments of certainty in the body of evidence, which was itself buried within the original discussion item for the Prisma 2009 statement, but now we're definitely recommending people report any methods they use to help make a judgment of how certain they are, and whether they upgraded or downgraded their certainty based on certain characteristics. And then we also have a new item asking people to declare whether their data, statistical code, and other materials are publicly available and where they can be found. I'll go through each of the items one by one later. This is just more high-level summary so far. And this is what the checklist looks like. We were thrilled, or I personally was thrilled, to manage to keep the checklist itself on 2 pages, like the original version. And so this checklist is freely available in Word version and PDF version of the Prisma Statement website. Now, I mentioned a bit earlier that we had changed the layout of the explanation and elaboration document. Those of you who consulted an E&E document for a reporting guideline, either for Consort or STARD or the original Prisma statement, might have noted that the way that most E&E documents are structured is to have, I find them exceptionally well written, but tending to have quite a lot of just paragraphs of text, which mixes a range of different things within the paragraph. So you might have some sentences explaining why we should report an item, with some sentences explaining what evidence there is of how well that's currently reported, and then interspersed within them some tips on additional things that authors should report. We decided for this update of Prisma, we thought to make it a bit clearer to authors what we recommend be reported, that we would separate things out. So we've structured it for each item in the E&E now has an explanation about why we think it should be reported, then a list of the reporting recommendations that essentially provide in a bit more detail what the checklist item is actually saying. I know some people had sort of pointed out in the past that sort of just saying, describe your methods of meta-analysis is not that helpful to someone who's never really done the meta-analysis before. And so we thought that by putting down in bullet points exactly what elements of the methods of synthesis we think should be reported would hopefully make it crystal clear what we were actually recommending. And then finally, we include an exemplar from a published review to illustrate how one might report that review. Report that item. And that appears, these items were sourced from across various different fields. We weren't wedded to a particular area of health research. Now, in addition to the checklist and the E&E document, we decided that for those people who don't really feel the need to consult a full explanation and elaboration document and just really want the bare minimum, they just want to know what exactly they need to report, we've extracted these elements for recommended reporting into an expanded checklist, which is a supplement to the Prisma statement papers, which again just goes down in dot points, showing you what each of the concrete recommendations are for each item in Prisma. We thought that's a new thing that hasn't really been developed for, I think, many reporting guidelines, and we thought that might be another way of communicating the guidance to authors. Also, we have Luke McGuinness, who was a co-author on the paper from Bristol. He managed last year to develop a Shiny app to allow people to complete their Prisma checklist. So that's freely available at this website here, where you can enter the location where each item is reported, be it a page number or section number or paragraph, whatever you want to report there is fine. And then you can essentially export or generate a report in either PDF or Word format. And it actually comes out quite pretty, I think. It looks quite close to the original template of the original, of the Word version we have on the website. Neil Hadaway has also very helpfully developed a Shiny app to help authors create a Prisma 2020 flow diagram, which is also freely available at the website listed on this slide here, where essentially you can fill in the numbers that would fit into each of these different boxes in the flow diagram and then export an image file to use in your review. We, of course, have a Word version for both the checklist and the flow diagram if people want to use that. We're just making various different options available for people to construct these things. And so now I'll just go over the items, just to really I'll comment on some of them just to point out how things might have changed. The title one hasn't really changed that much. Essentially, we're just highlighting the most important thing to report is that we've done a systematic review. We say in the elaboration, if you want to also add that you've done a meta-analysis or other synthesis methods within the title, that's fine. But we just think it's the minimum, it's most important to convey that you've done a systematic review. The original statement had quite a long sentence asking people what they should report in their abstract. Instead, this time we have a separate Prisma 2020 for abstracts checklist that essentially builds on the 2013 abstract extension and essentially just really maps the wording to the current Prisma 2020 wording. These two items for the rationale and objectives of the review are largely similar, just some minor changes to the wording, but essentially what you would expect with, at a bare minimum is to provide what's the reason why you're doing this review, what sort of knowledge you're hoping to address with the review, and then what the actual objectives or questions the review actually addresses are. Then when we come to the first section of the methods, we, for the eligibility criteria, we ask people to specify not only their inclusion and exclusion criteria for the review, but how they were planning to group those studies for syntheses. So it's helpful to not only specify that you'll be looking at these types of eligible either drug interventions and dosages or physical therapy interventions, what sort of things you would be eligible to, what sort of things you want to include in the review, but then how you would actually group them together. So would you be doing a synthesis of these drugs regardless of their dose and duration and regardless of other components of the intervention potentially? What I should say too, I should stop myself here and say, with all the things in Prisma, we've sort of structured it in this. We have put a structured way of there is an order in which we've presented this information, but there's no expectation that authors have to follow the order when they're reporting their review. If some things they feel belong and can be moved later in their report, that is completely fine. We're not trying to dictate how the actual sort of standard headings in which people report their review. And another thing too to note is that sometimes it can be better for end users of your review if a lot of the detail in the methods is not actually presented within the main method section, and some of it might be better situated within an appendix, or it might have already been reported in extensive detail in your protocol. And in that case, referring back to that protocol to point out where such information is, it will usually be sufficient. So while it may, I guess there is still a recommendation to report a lot of things within Prisma, as there always has been. There's no expectation that it all has to fit in to a nice, neat 2,000 word document. So yeah, now in terms of information sources, we've essentially just listed out possible sources you might consider consulting, just to remind people we're not just talking about databases, but essentially asking people just to report which ones they searched and when they last searched each source. And then, as I said earlier, for the search strategy, asking people to present the search strategies for all of their databases, registers, and websites, including any filters and limits used. Pretty much the only difference from the original version is we're just asking for all of them rather than just one. In terms of the selection process, we've essentially recommending people tell us how many people actually screened each title and abstract and full text report that was retrieved, whether they worked independently, and if applicable, any automation tools that they might have used in that process. A similar structure is used for the data collection process item, where again, we want people to specify how many authors extracted data from all the included studies, whether they worked independently or obtained additional data from study investigators, and again, any automation tools they might have used. Now the data items item in Prisma 2020 is quite a big change. We've sort of split it out into emphasizing quite a lot of information we want to know about your outcomes of interest that you actually focused on in your review. So that's what 10A is, getting people to really define sort of the eligible measures and time points and analyses that would meet their criteria for the outcomes that they're interested in. And also for them to note if there were multiple measures and outcomes, sorry, not measures and time points that are actually compatible with your outcome, with what you did with that information. Did you end up extracting it all, or did you tend to try and prioritize certain measures that have been deemed to be most important to patients, or only pick the latest follow-up time point, just so it's clearer what was actually extracted for inclusion in the review. And then 10B is essentially asking people to list all other variables that they extracted. Sometimes you can easily just address this particular item by uploading your template data collection form rather than reporting a full list in the main body of text. Then the study risk of bias assessment is not too different, essentially just asking people to declare what tools they used, how many reviewers assessed each study, and then again, any automation tools they might have used. Effect measures item is not much different. Again, just recommending that for each outcome or type of outcome, be they binary or continuous, to get authors to declare what measures they use, such as risk ratio or mean difference. And then when it comes to the synthesis methods, we've divided this into 6 sub-items, essentially getting people to describe any processes they use to decide whether studies were eligible for each synthesis. So sometimes it's a bit of a black box to know exactly how people decide what to lump together or what to split. And so we thought that by getting people to say, for example, mention that they tabulated the intervention characteristics and compare them against the plan groups, and then potentially change those plan groups in order to allow more data to be included in a synthesis. They're the type of things we're looking for in 13A. 13B is asking people to specify what how they prepared the data for synthesis, such as handling missing data or making conversions. Then 13C, any methods to tabulate or visually display results. 13D is more about what actual statistical synthesis methods were used. So, for example, if meta-analysis was performed, what models and methods were used, and how did we identify heterogeneity, and what software packages were used. And then 13E and F essentially are asking people to declare their methods for exploring heterogeneity, such as subgroup analysis or any sensitivity analyses they did. These were previously buried in an additional analysis item, which we felt was not really applicable so much anymore, given that some people's primary aim is to do a meta regression. It's not an additional analysis, it's the main focus of their review. And then our last 2 items for the methods is really just describe your methods for assessing risk of bias due to missing results that might arise from, say, publication bias or outcome reporting bias, and then any methods used to assess certainty or confidence in the body of evidence. For the results, essentially asking people to prepare a flow diagram in 16A, which shows the flow of records from search to inclusion, but while also in 16B recommending people cite any studies that might appear to meet the inclusion criteria, which were excluded, and explain why, really to essentially to correct you from anyone who might be wondering, any authors who might be wondering why you didn't end up including your study, which is essentially a near miss, nearly made it into the review, but ended up not. This is the new flow diagram we've created. We've essentially designed it for both updated or original reviews, and for reviews that either search just databases or go beyond just databases, really just separating that information out. So all these grey boxes can be considered optional, and so we've uploaded different word templates for these different for the different scenarios in which you might want to populate a flow diagram. Then in terms of the results, we have essentially asking people to cite all the included studies, which is strikingly something still not really done in a lot of reviews. Maybe reviews will cite the included studies in the appendix, but I think it's better to do it in their actual review itself so that you're actually giving proper credit to that article and they get citations to accrue on their paper. And also just present your assessments of risk of bias and the results of individual studies, such as the summary statistics and effect estimates. Then for each synthesis, present briefly the characteristics and risk of bias among each studies. I think now largely people tend to just summarize what risk of bias or the characteristics were for studies as a whole, for all studies included in the review, but that doesn't really make much, it's not that helpful if, say, you've got one meta-analysis, which is your primary meta-analysis, that's comprised of 3 studies of younger participants versus another meta-analysis with 10 studies of older participants. Just making a bit clearer how applicable each result is would be better. Then presenting the results of any statistical syntheses, such as the summary estimate of a meta-analysis and its heterogeneity. Results of any investigations of subgroup analyses and sensitivity analyses, reporting bias assessments, and your certainty assessments. So they essentially map onto the corresponding methods items. And nearly there, the discussion session, we've just sort of split this out into 4 subunits to help better convey what we want people to convey in their discussion. So not only a general interpretation, but some limitations of the evidence, limitations of the review itself, and any implications of practice. And then finally, we have a final section called Other Information, where we put the registration and protocol information, including any amendments from those at the end of the checklist. Main reason we moved it to the end was because we now ask people to declare any amendments. We thought by keeping it as the first method section item, that might lead some authors to feel like they should not only declare their methods, but then any deviations from their, declare the protocol. They should declare that they had a protocol or registered the review, and then go into declaring modifications to that before they've even outlined any of the methods they end up using. So we thought, it needs to be reported somewhere. We don't really mind where, but we thought just for better flow, put it at the end here. And then the last 3 items, essentially asking people to describe any financial or non-financial support they received from the review and any funders, any competing interests of the review authors, and then finally to report which of the following are available and where they can be found, such as template data collection forms, the raw data that was extracted from studies, the data that was actually used in the all analyses, any analytic code, and then maybe any other materials that are used in the review. I think in a large majority of cases, we feel like there's little to stop authors from presenting this information, but there are some scenarios, as we outlined in the E&E, where it may not be possible to do all that. And so just to summarize, Prisma 2020 replaces the 2009 statement and includes new guidance that reflects the advances in methods to identify, select, appraise, and synthesize studies. So we have Word templates and Shiny apps to help complete the checklists and flow diagrams, but definitely encourage everyone to go to the Prisma statement website for the latest versions to download. We're not really, at the moment, we're not anticipating that this is something that we would be updating on a yearly basis or something frequent like that, but there might be some changes that we decide need to be made in response either to user feedback or other changes within the field. And so we'll definitely make it aware to people via social media if any changes to the statements are made. Okay, so that's that's it essentially. So I'll stop there and happy with
Wonderful. Thanks,
questions.
Matt. That was a great presentation.
Thank you. So do you want me to stop sharing?
Sure. I mean, you could actually, if a question comes up, you could also bring it up, right? If it's addressing one of your slides.
True.
So
that's true.
One of the questions that we got was from somebody online before the presentation. And so I'll just read it out here. So the question is from Tiziano Innocenti, who is a PhD student. I would like to ask a question of Matthew Page for tonight's webinar. For specific study design, for example, in a network meta-analysis or in a DTA review, is the use of Prisma 2021 recommended in association with other extensions, or do you suggest using the extensions alone without Prisma 2021?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for now, what we would advise is for people to use Prisma 2020 in conjunction with the extension, so that because I think all of the extensions are pretty much based on the 2009 statement. Most of the extensions are very helpful in that they will help partition what was part of the original Prisma 2009 and what's new to their extension. So I think what we recommend people to do is to use Prisma 2020 and supplement it with the additional guidance for the extensions. But we do acknowledge that going forward, we do need to better harmonize across these extensions, and each of the extension leads, we encourage them to consider updating their extension so that it eventually is consistent with this too. But we know that that can take a bit of time and there's a bit more discussion.
Great, and that kind of is the same question as I just wanted to acknowledge that Paul Fennerman kind of asked the same question about basically other extensions like scoping, rapid evidence maps, basically like that. So, and then we have a question from Burke Cesar, who says that, I'm not really sure exactly what this means, but it says, by other methods on the right side, do you mean reference searching? So that could have had to do with maybe the search item?
Yes, yeah. So I'll go back there. Yeah, so other methods essentially, so for the flow diagram, the other methods are anything like contacting organizations, any forward or backward citation searching, which typically will have to occur after you've done your database searches, even just searches of Google websites, for which I think the reason we decide to partition this off is a lot of these records don't necessarily get imported into the reference management software that you would use to screen articles, traditionally things coming from databases or registers. And so we thought that by putting them in a separate box, that might make it easier to manage the flow of different records, because essentially for many authors, they're essentially two flows. It's not all in one. But if people want to put everything in one, we don't mind. Like, they can move these other methods into this box here if it's all able to be managed, and they're able to import them all into the same reference management software, then that's fine too. This is just a suggestion as a way to help get over the fact that sometimes those additional other sources that are consulted are not really screened in the same way as your typical abstracts would be.
Great. Okay, so we have another question from Jorge, who asks about prediction intervals. Are they mandatory now? If so, can you explain about a rationale and literature behind that decision?
No, that what I should say is that, well, nothing is mandatory. I mean, all things in Prisma are, even if its first word is preferred, this is just what our group decided we recommend people present. We list in the explanation and elaboration document that authors may choose to use prediction intervals as a way of estimating or demonstrating the extent of heterogeneity of results, but essentially list that in amongst other methods that are available for estimating heterogeneity. So, yes.
Okay, in the meantime, Matt, maybe you can answer. There's actually two questions from Adrian, who asks, how much effect in terms of time would you anticipate to follow this new tool for reporting and complete the checklist? So that's the first question. So how much time would it take? And then also, will Cochrane be using Prisma 2020 soon?
So in terms of time, to be honest, I'm not too sure. Like, it's not something that it's not something I've really estimated yet. The thing is too, though, that it is highly dependent on what new methods you've used. So if you've done if you've searched many databases, if you have a lot of outcomes, if you have a lot of meta-analyses, if you have a lot of included studies, then I think that will potentially just increase your workload. So and I think that's something that when you come to look at the explanation and elaboration document and or the expanded checklist, you'll notice that many of the items we recommend are preceded by the word if, essentially implying if you've actually adopted that method, then we recommend you report this. And so sometimes if you've done a lot, used a lot of methods, then you might end up needing to report a bit more than others. So unfortunately, I can't give a concrete example of how long it would take to complete. And then in terms of Cochrane, I don't know. I think Cochrane themselves already have a very good checklist of reporting items that they have already embedded within their processes called the Messiah standards, which was quite heavily influential on what ended up on our work as well. So I anticipate that Cochrane will be using Messiah for a long time. They've got all their editors trained in it to actually assess each review that they monitor, and I think that's a really good way of getting the really high quality reporting in Cochrane reviews. So there's quite a lot of consistency, I would say, between the two checklists anyway. There's a few additional things, but yeah, I think we're different parties essentially.
Yeah, okay, so we also have a question from Dr. Michelle Gates. She asks, what should be reported for missing results in a synthesis? Would you, for example, test for small study bias be enough? Aside from this, I have not seen in depth any assessment in most systematic reviews about missing results.
Yep, that's a good question. That itself is essentially a newish concept that is embedded within the new Cochrane handbook. Essentially, the Cochrane handbook on reporting, the chapter on reporting bias, chapter 13, essentially goes into a lot of detail now about looking beyond doing things like funnel plots or tests of small study effects as an ideal measure of publication bias, but also bringing in an assessment of the impact of any selective reporting of results within studies on the meta-analysis. And so we have a new tool and framework coming out to get people to assess that. But yeah, it is itself a newish concept. And so that's why you wouldn't have seen too many people using it. But essentially we're saying that at the meta-analysis level, it's not only unpublished studies, it's also selective reporting of results that can bias meta-analysis. And those are things that would need to be considered under that item.
Great. Okay, so we have, let's see who's next. So from Annie, who asks, are links to the Shiny app available on the Prisma website?
Yep, absolutely. So I think there is the tab on the Prisma website for the checklist. I think if you click on the main website, do you want me to share the screen and show you? Would that be helpful?
Oh yeah, that'd be
just
great.
Actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, just go to the Prisma website. All right, so let me get so here is the Prisma website. Essentially, all the Prisma 2020 documents are now in this key documents tab. If you go just to Prisma statements, and if you go to the checklist, there you can download a PDF or Word version, and here's the link to the Shiny app. And there's that expanded checklist I mentioned. And then the flow diagram also, this is Word versions of different scenarios. So if you're doing a new review that only searches databases, or a new review that searches multiple sources, and then updated for different scenarios. And then that that shiny app developed by Neil Hadaway is linked here as well. So
Okay, great.
stop that. Also, I'll say too that links to all of the papers are available on these tabs as well. So
Great, thank you. And then we also get a question from Hillary. Is there a sample flow diagram showing results broken down by database searched? Is this kind of granularity expected?
It's not expected. We say as a footnote to the flow diagram that providing that information can be useful. It's helpful for those really who want to sort of know what number of records were obtained in each database. So you could actually put it in that first box if you want. But it's, I think, I remember we toed and froed over it. There are some reviews I see that search 15 databases, and I think kind of trying to have a different flow or trying to fit that into one of the, just that first box could be quite difficult. So yeah, I think I understand why it is useful. In terms of replicability, it's very useful to know, but yeah, it's not necessarily expected to.
Great, yeah. And so from Bruno asks, since using automation tools are part of Prisma now, can you give us a few examples on the available automation tools for systematic reviews? And he says, if you use any.
I myself have, I have not been involved in a review that has used any yet, but I know that there are, I would highly recommend that anyone who's interested, I've got my Twitter handle, there's the SR Toolbox on Twitter is really a really good resource of collating all these different tools. Also, I know that the 2-week systematic review team from Bond University are also very helpful at presenting and conveying the different automation tools that they've been using and trialing out in their reviews too. There are also some developed within Cochrane as well, machine learning classifier within Cochrane. And there's things like Robot Reviewer for risk of bias assessment. But I think for a full database of different tools, definitely go to the SR Toolbox. You can just Google that or look it on Twitter.
Okay, great. And then we do get a question from Mario who asks, so I think I didn't catch Mario's first question because he says to add to my question above, but I didn't see it. So Mario, if you can add your first question, but he says that there seems to be a lot of disagreement about what a systematic review versus a scoping review is. Any guidance on that?
Well, I think that the best thing to do is to consult the Prisma for Scoping Reviews document or any of the scoping review manuals that quite clearly partition what they do is differently. The way I interpret the difference is that a scoping review is a form of mapping what literature is out there on a topic. So what type of study designs and what sort of questions they're addressing without necessarily planning to do any formal synthesis or meta-analysis of any of those results. And so I think an initial thing one could do is to do a scoping review to find out what amount of literature there are on particular questions. Oh, good, in the chat, someone's cited a paper that's useful. So as I say, you could do a scoping review to identify what type of literature is out there on the topic, and then choose to do a systematic review and meta-analysis or other synthesis on one of the questions for which there is a high volume of research and no other systematic review exists. So, yes.
Okay, great. Let's see. So I will move on to Laura James asks, any plans for 2020 for protocols?
I think that's something, again, we need to discuss with the people who led that. And I think, yeah, it would be good to get those uniform and consistent with one another. But I think for the most part, it's been the checklist itself for Prisma P protocols is actually quite, it's already rather close to Prisma 2020 itself. So, I mean, for example, Prisma P already had included an item on assessing certainty in the evidence, or pre-specifying your methods for assessing certainty, which Prisma 2009 hadn't. So I think I don't think that at the moment users of Prisma P should feel like they're being shortchanged or anything. Like, I think it is quite relevant to use, but we will be, work out updating.
Okay, we have another question from Mario. Are the old guidelines now made obsolete? Is there a strong statement not to use them anymore? And should they be updated in a database similar to the way systematic reviews are updated, so that the old version is not really shown anymore?
Well, essentially that has already happened, because on the Prisma statement website, the 2009 checklist it appears in the history tab. So all the links on the Prisma statement website all linked to Prisma 2020 now. And yes, there is there is a recommendation to move on to using Prisma 2020. So we'll be working with journals to help communicate that information to them, and because some of them may have their own systems where they already have their own links that prompts people to use the 2009 station. So that's a work in progress to get people across the new guidelines. But yes, we definitely think that the new ones, in the paper itself, we say it replaces the 2009 version. And yeah.
Wonderful, great question. Okay, and so final question from Karen is, if full search strategies for each databases are included, for example, in a supplemental material, then this would be a good place to record the total numbers retrieved by each search rather than clogging up the flow diagram. It is useful when peer reviewing the search strategy to get a feel for how the search ran on each database, so it is a nice to somewhat, it is nice, basically, in her opinion.
I completely agree. Yeah, putting that information there is in the appendix rather than clogging up the flow diagrams.
Okay, and I have a question actually for my own interest, Matt. So I know you've done a lot of work to disseminate the publication of the Prisma 2020. I mean, you are publishing in, I think, maybe 6 journals. Is that correct, or more?
5, yeah.
5. So I mean, that's probably just a huge, colossal work in itself to get that coordinated, right? How did you do that, and how do you recommend other people disseminate their research in an equally effective way?
So that process was essentially us just contacting the editors-in-chief of those journals. Most of them had published the original version, and we had contacted them to let them know before we would submit it, we contacted them like several months beforehand to say, well, we've got this update and we were wondering if you'd be interested in co-publishing it again, with one of the journals taking the lead on that process. So the BMJ were the ones who took the lead in terms of finding peer reviews, and the other journals essentially agreed to accept the accepted version of the BMJ, but then were responsible to do their own copy editing and formatting and things like that. So I think it was really just approaching journals and saying, we think that this is a good opportunity to really get this work out there. We had the fortune of building on the previous relationship we had with them, though. So yeah, but it's not going to be appearing in other journals, except there are some journals now that are going to be publishing translations of the guideline. So there are, I think, about 9 different translations so far that are.
Wow, that's wonderful, actually. Such great work that you're doing. Well, I wanted to really thank you for joining us today. It's been a wonderful presentation, and I think in the chat you could see how many people have just said thank you, and it's been very informative. It was a very clear and amazing presentation, so thank you again. And everybody, please help me say thank you to Matthew for his great presentation today.
Thanks so much. It's a great opportunity.